I'm going to show my screen, and I'm going to start the broadcast.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's version of Nebraska Farm Bureau's issue update webinar. I'm live here in the home office in Lincoln, Nebraska. My name is Jay Farros. I'm the Director of Grassroots Programs for Nebraska Farm Bureau. Hopefully everybody is joining our webinar as we're getting started here, and hopefully everybody can hear me. As we begin, we do have two of our staff members here in governmental relations that will be giving the presentation this evening. Anthony Arts for our state issues and Jordan Dux for our national affairs. Before we get started, I do just want to have a couple of can you hear me now? Okay. Anthony just came in and said he couldn't hear me. Is anybody else? Jordan, can you hear me?
I can now, Jay.
Okay.
I didn't hear you for a while, so.
Okay. Maybe I'm having some issues with my microphone, but we will see how that goes. But don't know what you heard, but if you have a question, you can simply text it in the question box that would be in your dashboard area. Type it there, hit send. I will see that. I will be able to ask the presenter the question. Also, if you have a microphone hooked up to your computer, you can click on the raise your hand button. I will see that, and I can unmute your microphone. And then you can ask your question. You do need to be on where you have a microphone. I do see I have someone who has raised their hand to ask a question. So we will go there. I will unmute their microphone. Gail and Helen. Can you hear me? I think they can. I don't think they actually had a question. So, but that is the other way to ask the question. Once again, would like to thank everybody for being on this evening on this issue update webinar. This is a service we provide to our Farm Bureau members to keep them informed of what we are doing and what is going on, what's happening in both the state capitol building and also in Washington, D.C. So with that, tonight we're going to change things up a little bit. If you've been on these webinars before, we've always started with state issues. And tonight we're going to start with national issues. So we're going to turn it over to Jordan. And I am going to give him control.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Jay, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine, Jordan. You're sounding
perfect. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks again for jumping on the call here. Wanted to run through a couple things. Last time, if you were on for our last webinar, I did kind of a detailed Farm Bureau or Farm Bill breakdown, excuse me. And I don't want to go through, and if folks have specific Farm Bill questions, I will certainly get to those in the way of questions, but I wanted to do something a little different. I didn't want to hit on the exact same thing as we did last time, so if you've had a chance, recently, it was just last week, we sent out a top 10 things to know about the Farm Bill. You can see it here on the right-hand side of your screen. By the way, this is our Nebraska Farm Bureau webpage, This is our specific Farm Bill, 2014 Farm Bill breakdown. It's under the Policy and Issues tab. You select that one. You go over here to the left and click on 2014 Farm Bill breakdown. This is what you come up with, and it's very detailed, folks, and I would say that if anyone has any questions about the Farm Bill, about specific titles, just go through and select, here's on the budgetary one, it'll pop right up. It shows you what the Farm Bill spent, and you go back and you can see what the commodity title included, what the conservation title included, so on and so forth. Please utilize the services or this that we provide for you here. If you have questions about the Farm Bill, hopefully folks will find it useful, and we're trying to drive as many people as we can to the website because of the fact that this new Farm Bill is so unbelievably complicated in many ways, and this is maybe hopefully kind of a one-stop shop for folks if they have questions about the farm. But moving to what I was going to talk about, last week we sent out this top 10 things to know about the bill. This is kind of a beginner's guide to what folks need to know. I wanted to run through that just super quick, and then if folks have more specific questions, I can certainly answer those. But this top 10 things, you know, it's a beginner's guide. It's just to start out with. And I'll start at number 10. You know, it's important to know that USDA rules for the 2014 Farm Bill will come out in late 2014. Secretary Vilsack had made the comment just a couple of days ago that really we may not be seeing rules written on this Farm Bill, and they wouldn't be out until the 2014 crop is in the bin. And so we have some time yet. And so remember that while we have a really good understanding as to what these programs will look like, there are some specific rules here and there the USDA does have to write. And so deadlines for program startups, you know, we're looking at fall, late fall 2014 before that happens. So that's number 10. Number 9, you know, corn and soybean farmers really start by looking at the ARC program. The ARC program is the new revenue program, replaces ACRE. You'll have the option to sign up for one of two versions of the ARC program. One of them is county level coverage. The other one is individual coverage, and we'll get to that in question number 8. The other program you have the option of signing up for is a price loss program, or an updated target price program with updated higher target prices for most commodities. Corn, for one, being at $3.70 compared to the $2.90, I believe it was, under the 2008 bill. But really, corn and soybean farmers in Nebraska and really all over the Corn Belt are probably going to look at the ARC program first. Just as a suggestion, investigating what that program will mean for you. And again, you can go to our Farm Bill website and explain that. And if you have specific questions on that one, I can certainly answer that. But moving forward to number 8, county or individual ARC, which one's better for you? Really, I think a lot of folks are going to focus on the county ARC program. It provides revenue coverage for county losses anywhere from 14 to 24%. That's your loss band. And so I think folks really need to probably look at that one first before they really kind of move on to the individual side. The individual ARC program is different, and it's almost a completely different program. While it still is a revenue program, it's on the individual farm level. On the county side, it's a crop-by-crop program, so you can decide what you want on a crop-by-crop basis. You may want your corn and soybeans signed up with the ARC program at the county level, and your wheat you can put in the price loss program. If you select individual ARC, it provides whole farm program. It's a whole farm protection, so it's not crop-by-crop, it's whole farm. And how that works when it comes to farms in multiple counties, so on and so forth, those are still questions that USDA still is, I think, working out. But I think county ARC is where folks are going to probably start. Individual ARC, be sure to look at that one as well. But that's kind of, ARC is probably a good place to start. It's also important not to overlook the price loss program because of the new supplemental coverage option. If you're a farmer who cares, is really not concerned about revenue, more so focused on price, and when you look at what USDA's price projections for 2014 and beyond, where they're at, you know, price loss coverage may not be such a bad deal. It's again has updated target prices. Corn at 370. Soybeans are updated as well. Wheat is updated. You can go and find that list on the main part of the website where it's the Farm Bill breakdown here. But that's an option for folks as well. If you sign up for the price loss program, you can also utilize the new SCO, otherwise known as the supplemental coverage option. It's a crop insurance program, so it's not a free program like the other ones are. It's one you actually have to pay for that allows you to purchase county level insurance that would cover part of the deductible on your individual or revenue product, whatever one that you had purchased. And so this is a product that folks might find useful. It provides coverage up to 86%. 86% BIF is what you can get from this program. It's subsidized a little higher, but it also is still, like I said, has a price tag associated with it. It's just a new crop insurance product. So this one would be available beginning of the 2015 crop year. So backing up just a little bit, or moving forward, you have these options between the new revenue program, the new price loss program. You get one shot to get this right. You sign up for any of these programs for the life of the Farm Bill, just like Acre was. And so you know, you're looking at the possibility of the supplemental coverage option, but you've got to sign up, and you're locked in even though it's not available until 2015. If you select the price loss, the updated target price program. So those are things to keep in mind. Again, you have the one shot to get this right, and otherwise you're locked in for the 5 years of the Farm Bill. Number 5, conservation compliance and crop insurance. They are now linked. You had to be in compliance with conservation practices, conservation requirements under the old bill if you signed up for direct payments and other farm programs. Crop insurance, this is the first time that the two are now linked. It's something that we had some questions about, obviously. It's one thing to lose a portion of a direct payment. It's another thing to lose crop insurance. But this is something that they did come in. So it's not no new requirements, but it's requirements that you had to have already in order for you to get direct payments. So that's number 5. Number 4. A good thing for Nebraska, the ability to certify irrigated versus non-irrigated crops. You can insure them at different levels. You know, again, customization of your crop insurance, I think most folks will find this useful. It is not available until 2015, but for Nebraska that has both irrigated and dry land, I think it's going to be beneficial to us really in the long run. Number 3, conservation programs, they still exist, but they did receive a reduction in funding. CRP lost some acreage that can be enrolled in the program, all the way from 32 million acres that can be enrolled in 2000, at the end of 2013. That brings us down to 24 million acres by 2014, and really, or by the end of the Farm Bill, really 24 million acres. It just kind of keeps reducing year after year. Again, look at our Farm Bill page for those specific years and dates. But really, a reduction in funding on CRP. EQIP received a $500 million reduction. CSP received a funding reduction. Again, these programs are available, but sign up. If you're a new sign up to some of these, or you may have been on the bubble when it comes to CRP, I think USDA is probably going to really focus in on marginal crop ground versus land that folks just want to put into CRP. So that may be something to keep in mind. Number 2, livestock disaster assistance begins April 15th. We had worked really hard to try to get these livestock disaster programs reauthorized in this new Farm Bill. Funding for these programs ran out at the end of 2011, and I could some budget gimmicks to why they did that a year earlier compared to the rest of the Farm Bill, but they did expire. And so what we were able to do is not only get these reauthorized, but we were able to get them reauthorized retroactively, all the way back to 2012. And this is not just for indemnity. This is not just for the livestock who maybe passed away due to a blizzard. This is also another program, the Forage Loss program, is also included in this. And so going back to 2012, if you had some pretty significant forage losses, this is one of these programs, the Forage Loss program, that would be one to look into. And so we got these reauthorized retroactively back to 2012. You can begin to sign up at your local FSA offices beginning on April 15th. There are some specific lists and some things in which you can do to sign up for the programs, what they're going to need in terms of documentation. But these are programs I think that livestock producers will find useful. I will say, just so you're all aware before I get to number one, we are looking to hold some livestock disaster assistance meetings for these programs in the western part of the state here coming up in the next few weeks. So I'll get to that here in a second, but I wanted to say that real quick before I left the livestock disaster side. And then number one, you know, this bill is complicated. It's new. There's a lot to chew on. There's a lot of options for producers this time around, which really means that you need to communicate as best you can with your landlords and lenders and really look at what safety net program works best for you. And really take a look. I know that university folks are going to be putting together some tools for you to enter in your acreage and some yield estimates and put in your data from the past 5 years. And really take a look as to what these programs may look like for you. So please pay attention to that. Please pay attention. We're going to send out as many resources as we can, so keep looking at your email. Keep coming to this Farm Bill page on Farm Bureau's website. We're going to try to send out as much as we can. But that's kind of a quick rundown of the Farm Bill. Again, it's a top 10 list. The AP picked this thing up when we sent it out, so hopefully producers will find it handy. One of the other things that we're going to link to on here is this new USDA ERS sent out this new, came up with this new Farm Bill help page. It's really kind of nice. It provides nice summaries of every title, the commodity title, dairy, livestock, conservation, nutrition, so on and so forth. So we'll link to this one. So folks can have, again, as many resources as we can give you. So be paying attention to that. I had mentioned, to back up a little bit, the livestock disaster assistance meetings we're going to have. We're looking to have those really in a couple of weeks. The first one will be in Cherry County up at Valentine, we believe. So we're still kind of planning on the dates and times, and so please bear with us, but we'll get those out as soon as we can. But tentatively right now, we're looking to hold one in Valentine. We're looking to hold one in North Platte, in Broken Bow, and then possibly also out in Bridgeport, out in Morrill County. So that's where we're looking to have those meetings. We'll get you the information once we get them 100% set here in the next few days. But be paying attention to that. We're going to focus in on the livestock disaster programs, mainly specifically because we have a sign-up date with that one. We have specifics as to what FSA will need for producers. We don't have that necessarily yet for the crop products, but please keep looking there. The last thing I wanted to hit on very briefly tonight, excuse me, Farm Bureau has done a lot of work recently on data privacy, and we have sent this out, and I handed you all this guide. If you made it to our legislative conference, we've tried to send it out a couple of times here to folks so they could have access to it. We're going to put it up on the website here shortly. But as Precision Ag really kind of moves forward, there's a lot of questions that arise. And Farm Bureau has really been working with a lot of companies that are utilizing this, whether it be your seed companies, your equipment dealers, anyone and everyone is really focused in on this new thing. And it's not just GPS anymore, folks. As you all know, it's data gathering. It is crop data to where you can really, if you look, I mean, you're getting crop data, specific crop data within, you know, a couple square yards. And I think that as technology advances, as we continue to go down this path, as it appears that every seed and implement company is really pushing for, you know, it's going to be really not a matter of a couple square yards. It's going to be plant by plant. And so I apologize if folks have seen this already. I can certainly answer some questions on this one, and I could get going for a long time on this one. But I just wanted to pull this one up for folks real quick just some things. So when you're signing up for these programs, when you're signing up through DuPont or through Monsanto to utilize some of their programs or with John Deere, these are 9 questions just to think about before you sign any contract. And I'm not going to run through them all. I just want to run through a couple of them just so folks can maybe, again, be a little bit aware of what's going on this front. But I really think first and foremost it's important when you look at question number 1, this is a question that a lot of people have right away. Do I own the data? And the answer is yes, but to an extent. When you look at the data that is generated from your farm, you own your own individual data. That belongs to you. But what companies really want is to be able to take your name out of it and aggregate that with your neighbor's data, with all of your neighbor's data, and try to compile that to get real-life, real-world examples as to how their products are performing. And what the companies would say is that once they take your name out of it, that data then belongs to them. It's something different. And so what we had kind of used as an example is Google or Yahoo or Hotmail, any of these free email accounts that folks sign up for. It's you own your name in your Gmail account, but really and they're free. Google allows you to utilize Gmail for free. Yahoo allows you to use their system for free. But what they do is they scan through all your emails. And they will go through, find keywords, and they will specifically try to advertise specific products to you based upon the emails you get. If folks didn't know that, hopefully that's not a complete mind-blowing thing for you, but that's really what goes on. And so the price for you to utilize that space, the price for you to use their email services is your data. And that's why, if you've noticed, as you go up to if you use a Google search and you search for something, say I search for I search for Ford. I'm looking for a new car, I search for Ford. Well, probably for the next few weeks you're going to get on your screen quite often a lot of Ford ads from local dealers, from Ford themselves, really all over your screen, because that's what Google is trying to sell. They look at that search engine, they see what you search for, and they try to advertise to you. That's how they generate revenue. That's how they make money. And so really this kind of all fits in with that, on that same thing. Producers are generating all this data, and that's kind of what the world we're living in right now is, as producers own their own individual data, but when you aggregate that, when you take their name out, that ownership becomes maybe a little bit more tricky. How will it be used? What benefits can I expect, so on and so forth. This is a question to really ask the company in which you're signing up a contract for. Please ask as many questions as you possibly can before you sign any type of contract at all. Will I control the management of the data? You will, but to an extent. Again, you own your own individual data. You can control that, but once they take your name out, that gets a little bit more tricky. Again, number 4 goes into aggregation. Is it anonymized? It is anonymized. Your data normally is, but there's normally some other things that go along with that, so on and so forth. Again, this is just a helpful document that I hope folks will have a chance to read through. If you want a copy, you can certainly shoot me an email, and I'll get you a specific copy of this. We're trying to send it out to as many people as we can, because if we had to boil this down really to 2 things, really first and foremost, I have to say, like any contract, read every single thing before you sign it. That's important. That's number 1. Number 2, ask questions. And really try to ask as many questions as you can before you sign any contract. And one of the things that I will say is your organization is really working hard with these companies to try to do one thing. And this is a lot more difficult than folks would think it is, but it's really to try to work to create a standardized contract as much as we can. Because within one company, one thing sounds, the word affiliate. We can share your data with affiliate companies. Well, what John Deere says affiliate is and what Case says affiliate is may be 2 very different things. And so really trying to work to standardize these agreements to an extent as best we can, that's first and foremost one of the things that we're trying to work on. We're going to continue to try to meet with these companies as we move forward. But I wanted to hit on that just real quick. Again, I'll be willing to answer any questions that folks have on that. That is a really brief rundown of that, but I can certainly try to answer any questions that folks have on that front as well. But with that, Jay, I might turn it back over to you for some questions, and we can I'll answer any questions that folks may have.
Okay, well, thank you, Jordan. Yeah, if anybody does have a question, you can simply type it in your question box, or you can raise your hand. If you have a microphone, we can turn on your microphone. You can ask it live. And specifically looking for questions for Jordan at this point. And Jordan, maybe you mentioned this, but is there, I know there's been some talk on the data issue, whether or not if you sign up for it and later can you get that your own data back?
It's a good question, Jay. To be quite honest, the answer to that is currently no. Most companies, when you sign up with them, once you provide your data, you can again get your original data back, but once they take your name out, you're kind of really up to the discretion of the company. And so normally, no, you can't get it back, but that's one of the things that we are working on. Nebraska Farm Bureau introduced an amendment that was a part of the policy resolution that was passed at our state convention, really to try to address that particular issue. What better way to say that a producer owns their data than the ability for that producer to get that data back out of an aggregated data set, so a company can't sell that in the future. Because, folks, if you really look at what the power of this is and what the goals are, it's to provide producers with really detailed, a detailed analysis of how their farm is performing. But there's also real-time data that's being generated by your equipment because of how you planted things, your soil type, so on and so forth. And as you can imagine, this data is extraordinarily valuable to folks who know how to use it correctly. Specifically those folks who may want to use it who do a little bit of trading on the board, like a Goldman Sachs. It's something that as you look at the power of what this could be, it is exciting in many ways. It also can be very frightening. And so it kind of goes back to that idea that producers need to make sure that they are understanding and signing every single thing. They know what they're signing, really before they enter into any particular contract.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Are there any other questions for Jordan? Okay, I'm not seeing any at this point, so I think we will switch presenters at this time, and we will send it over to Anthony. So bear with us as we change the screens on our view here, and if anyone does have a question for Jordan, you can go for it. I don't know, Jordan, are you planning on staying with us for a little while yet?
I will. Yep. Anyone has any questions, I'll be feel.
Okay. Thank you for that, Jordan. And now we will turn it over to Anthony. I think we have your screen up now. If you can go ahead and start your PowerPoint, and you should be live.
Okay, thank you, Jay. And you can see my PowerPoint?
We can see your screen, but you haven't started the show yet. So
How about that?
there you go. Looks great.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks so much, Jay. All right, well, tonight I'm going to try to provide you a summary as efficiently as possible on what's been happening down at the state legislature over the last couple weeks since the last webinar. So I just wanted to start by providing a brief overview of what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to start by just sort of describing the pace and the atmosphere as it currently stands on day 40 of the 60-day legislative session. From there, I'm going to move on to what we spent most of today talking about, which is a bill to provide for deficit appropriations to fill gaps in the budget and accommodate new spending items that are being proposed this session. I'm going to talk about property tax reform efforts, water funding, a few livestock growth efforts, and then end on a positive note by talking about the MAP 21 CDL exemption, which is something that we haven't been able to categorize as positive for most of the time it's been up. So in regards to the pace and atmosphere, as it stands on day 40, all the public hearings have been completed and the legislature began all-day floor debate last week. As many people on here know, there have been a number of filibusters already waged this session, oftentimes on issues that many were considered surprising in that they were basically filibustered or opposed so vigorously, like amber lights or novelty lighter sales, and that has eaten up a fair amount of time and also has led to many of the major issues that people had their eye on coming into the session as of yet undiscussed. There's a growing unease with what's been done in regards to tax reform by the legislature this session. Obviously, the governor laid out his expectations in the year prior and heading into this session, ranging in that $300 to $500 million of tax relief area. Of course, the entire body, there's a fair deal of political rancor going on. A great number of the members are running for some political office. And in regards to the major issues I mentioned, we talked about the budget today, and there's still discussions to be had on water funding, on Medicaid expansion, and on prison overcrowding, to name a few. That date, March 18th, will be a big one on the state legislative calendar. Depending on how that Medicaid expansion discussion goes, could sort of set the tone for the rest of session. As I mentioned, for the last year and a half, we've always said the issue of the day was tax relief or tax reform, and I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball tonight to say that we spent most of today talking about LB 905, which would provide for deficit budget appropriations. That is to provide for the additional funding that is needed to cover the spending commitments that were laid out in last year's budget discussions, and or potentially use excess revenues that became available. A couple Fridays ago, the Economic Forecasting Board issued a report that basically suggested that the revenue intake of the state would exceed the actual budget outlays by $99 million over what was originally projected for the fiscal year from 2013 all the way up to 2015. By law, $36 million of that goes into the cash reserve, which would bring the cash reserve total to an all-time high of $761 million, and then the additional $63 million balance would be available for new spending items for 2014-15. However, it then goes to the court of the Appropriations Committee to decide exactly how this money would be allocated. The Appropriations Committee had until March 10th to come back with its final budget adjustment recommendations and release their final report last Friday. Under the proposal that they laid out, spending would increase from 5.2% for fiscal year 2014-15 to 5.5%. But I have to add that some of those spending increases, in fact many of those spending increases, are items that we're very interested in, including a recommendation to increase the amount of funding into the property tax credit program by $25 million, recommendations to provide for $31 million in water funding, and also $17.5 million for game and parks deferred maintenance projects, which is not necessarily something that's at the front of our radar, but we were involved in discussions around funding for game and parks last year. So at the end of the day, the committee laid out those recommendations and also basically left $91 million on the table for new spending items, bills that had been introduced this year or carried over from last year that would have appropriation bills attached to them. One of the bills that essentially already speaks for some of that money is a $33 million bill that would devote that amount to TIOSA state to school funding. But beyond that, there's a lot of money on the table, a lot of hands grabbing for it, including money for prison reform, potentially property tax credit increases. And at the end of the day, with all these adjustments made, there would be about $697 million left in the cash reserve. The reason I start with this discussion is because it segues into many of the other discussions that we have been having or will be having in the weeks ahead. So now to everyone's favorite topic, the efforts to reduce the Agleam valuation ratio to 65%. As you all know, there were 2 bills introduced last year and then 3 more bills introduced this year that would have lowered this valuation to 65%. At the end of the day, when the dust settled, Senator McCoy and Senator Brosh had both designated their particular bills as priorities for this session. However, the bills were stuck in Revenue Committee. Even going into last week, it was unclear how the Revenue Committee would choose to act on these bills, and Farm Bureau, cattlemen, other commodity organizations made a very aggressive lobbying effort to try to get the Revenue Committee to advance these bills. However, we were very disappointed. At the end of the day, on Thursday, we learned the Revenue Committee had met in executive session and basically deadlocked in a 4-4 vote to try to advance one of these bills out of the committee onto general file. So the implications of this deadlocked vote are that, at least for this session, we probably don't expect to see any legislation that will reduce the valuation ratio to 65%. And then just for everyone's information, I wanted to share some of the common arguments that we heard against this particular measure. One was that it didn't go far enough, it didn't do enough. Another was that it would hurt county or school district spending. And the last was that it wouldn't be equitable when compared to the fact that residential property owners had to pay 100% of the value of their property. And so those were some of the arguments we were trying our best to counter, but at the end of the day, the Revenue Committee failed to advance this bill. Obviously, on the other property tax relief front is more money into the property tax credit program. Now, I just want to highlight some of the events that led up to what happened today. The Revenue Committee originally had sent a letter to the Appropriations Committee suggesting that an additional $47 million be sent to the property tax credit program on top of the $150 million that's already dedicated through appropriations to that fund. The Appropriations Committee essentially rejected that proposal, suggesting that appropriations was their turf and that Revenue Committee should stay away from it. And in response, they came back and offered a $25 million per year increase into the property tax credit program, which would bring the total to $140 million per year, so still more than what's being appropriated today. Senator Hadley today, during the discussions around the budget bill, offered an amendment that would have actually upped that increase to $45 million. Given what happened with the ag land valuation ratio the week before, Farm Bureau thought that it was in our best interest to try to work to obtain this $45 million increase. It would have brought the total in the fund to $160 million, and 37% of that goes to agricultural landowners. We lobbied hard, and the body used a motion to call essentially an early vote, and the vote failed 20-18 to appropriate this $45 million into the property tax credit program. So far, things have not been working out quite like we'd like them to in terms of tax reform efforts. Additional efforts that we could see come up here in the next few weeks include individual income tax rate reductions, adjusting the income tax brackets for inflation, exempting Social Security income. There were some discussions around how the state might use any future sales tax collected on internet transactions. One measure that we didn't necessarily see as generating a lot of attention at the beginning of the session is a measure introduced by Senator Nordquist of Omaha, which would basically provide for a constitutional amendment to be placed on the ballot this fall to remove residential real property from the Uniform Proportionate Clause of the Constitution. Now, if you recall, agricultural land is already exempt from this particular clause, and so it would essentially afford residential landowners the same leeway in setting valuations and other mechanisms for valuing their real property as ag land currently has. That measure is sort of still being discussed. And then finally, one bright spot is that LB 96, which removes the sales tax on ag repair parts, is now sitting on general file and sort of waiting for the rest of any tax reform measures to catch up to it before it can be sent on to the governor's desk. Another area that relates to appropriation. Yes?
While you're on property taxes, we do have a question on property tax relief that I will send your direction.
Okay.
And it is, Senator Carpusek getting any traction on sending money back to counties for property tax relief? And then the other part of this question is this: if this happens, will there be an attempt to means test the money?
I guess the answer to that question is I haven't heard any significant discussion around those efforts, and therefore I don't know the answer to the second part of the question, actually.
Okay. So, in other words, he's probably not getting any traction on that thought.
That's probably a good way to say it.
Okay. Okay, you can go ahead.
All right, thank you. Moving on to another area that relates back to appropriations is, of course, water funding, something else we studied over the interim, and which a report was produced and issued in December, suggesting ways the state could provide more dedicated long-term funding for the very significant water projects that need to be addressed around the state. At the beginning of session, there were 3 bills introduced. Everyone has heard about these by now, so I won't spend too much time on them other than to point out that one bill to transfer money from the cash reserve asked for $50 million. Another bill asked for $50 million in ongoing fund transfers from the general fund. And then the third bill, LB 1098, would basically restructure the Natural Resource Committee, changing the number of members who would be appointed by the governor from 3 up to, I believe, 14, which would bring the total number of members on the commission to 27 members, and then the main function of this newly restructured commission would be to essentially assess and distribute the funds that would be provided, new funds that would be provided for water funding. Of course, with anything, there's give and take, and so at the end of the day, what it came down to is what the Appropriations Committee was willing to offer for water funding, and not surprisingly, the amounts were not as much as originally asked for. And so what we saw in the Appropriations Committee's final report was they offered $10.5 million in general fund appropriations to the Resources Development Fund, which already exists, and those funds would be used to essentially finance the completion of water projects that have already been started but lack the funding to be finished currently. Additionally, the Appropriations Committee's recommendation would provide a one-time $10 million transfer from the cash reserve to the newly created Water Sustainability Fund, and that would sort of more be wrapped up in some of the efforts that occurred with the Water Funding Task Force over the interim. And then finally, the Appropriations Committee, not $50 million, but offered to provide $11 million in ongoing general fund appropriations to the Water Sustainability Fund for projects to be started, assessed, and started in the future. So I guess in terms of what to look out for on the agenda for the state legislature going forward is discussions around LB 1098 to restructure the Natural Resources Committee, and also around LB 1098, the appropriations bill for that bill, which is where the actual funding mechanisms would be implemented. However, I will also add that within the Appropriations Committee budget recommendations, it already accounts for this funding going forward, and so it won't actually be part of the additional $91 million that's sitting on the table for grabs. Next, I want to address livestock growth efforts. As you all know, Farm Bureau's, that's one of our top priorities, to grow our rural livestock industry. It helps with community development, economic development, and so on. One of the bigger bills that was introduced this session to try to do so was LB 942, introduced by Senator Schills. This would provide for packer ownership, custom feeding arrangements for the pork industry only. It would have nothing to do with the cattle industry. Currently, such arrangements are banned by state law. This would effectively exempt swine from that ban. And this measure was brought forward by the pork producers and the industry, largely industry-driven. The hearing was held. The bill is right now stuck in Ag Committee, and at least at this point in time, it doesn't have a lot of promise. That both Senator Chambers and Senator Lathrop have threatened to filibuster the bill if it should get out on the floor. However, another livestock growth bill that was introduced by Senator Schills this session is LB 941. And what this bill would do would provide a small amount of funding to initiate a study into how to grow the state's dairy industry. This bill was advanced by the Ag Committee and also designated as an Ag Committee priority bill, and it was discussed on the floor last week and almost, I would say, easily was advanced on from general file to enrollment and review initial. The funding for this source and one of its benefits of this bill is it doesn't require additional general fund appropriations. Rather, it would utilize pre-existing surpluses in the Commercial Cash Feed and Grain Fund, which is administered by the Department of Ag. And finally, to end on somewhat of a bright note, as you all know, we've been working for a long time trying to implement the CDL exemption for covered farm vehicles that was provided in July of 2012 through the passage of MAP 21 legislation at the federal level. This is a federal requirement. If states don't have it implemented into their state law by 2016, they stand to lose in excess of $40 million in federal funding. Now, this bill was originally introduced as LB 249 by Senator Annette Dubas, who is the chairwoman of the Transportation Committee. However, there was a number of other bills also introduced between last session and this session, which also tried to implement changes made at the federal level. So basically everything was folded together under the umbrella of LB 983, which was then designated as a Transportation Committee priority bill. The package legislation was advanced from general file in discussion that occurred probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, I want to say. In the interim between then and kind of last week, there was a number of misconceptions that arose over what was or wasn't required by the CDL exemption for covered farm vehicles. Should people pulling a nurse tank with a pickup truck also be required to have a CDL because they're pulling hazardous materials? Essentially, we kind of teamed up with some of the other ag organizations, did some research, and helped to dispel most of those misconceptions. And so the final package legislation that was advanced from select file onto final reading provides for a CDL exemption for drivers of covered farm vehicles, your semi-trucks, your straight trucks, etc., so long as the driver is over 18 years of old and is not hauling hazardous materials with a truck, tractor, semi-trailer combination. But otherwise, if you're within the parameters laid out by the MAP 21 legislation within the state or 150 air miles of your farm and ranch, once this bill is passed into law and everyone's on board with the enforcement that is then required, farmers and ranchers would no longer be required to have a CDL to haul their product to market, haul their supplies back to the farm, these sorts of things. So with that, I'll conclude and answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. We will open it up for questions. I do see we have a couple of questions coming in for you. First one, getting back to MAP 21, so if the question is, if my CDL is coming due in May, am I safe to not renew it?
I think that what I would say to you right now is that there has been so much confusion and surprises around this issue. Anything that's going to be passed into law this session will have been passed into law by May, but then the other question is whether or not the State Patrol will have revised its enforcement regulations by that time such that the actions it undertakes in the field will accord with the new law changes. So I guess what I'm saying is that assuming this does pass into law, you know, no more surprises, it's on final reading, there's no reason it shouldn't pass into law, then it would be state law that you wouldn't need to renew it, provided you're operating within the parameters laid out by the legislation. However, I can't say for sure that the State Patrol will be fully on board at that point in time. And you probably don't like that answer, but
So it might not hurt to renew it for at least one more year, is what you're saying, possibly?
probably so.
Yeah. Okay. Another question related to the MAP 21, does this only apply to family members, or does this also apply to employees?
It also applies to employees.
Okay.
Provided those employees aren't also engaging in commercial trucking jobs on the side.
Okay. But as far as working for your farm on your farm-plated trucks, they'd probably be legal on that.
Yep, they're completely fine. They don't need a CDL anymore.
Okay.
They wouldn't need a CDL anymore.
Okay. Also, here's another question, a different subject. Is Senator Schill's LB 941, what is the meaning of the language stating a tonnage tax on feed, and is this a new tax on producers?
I don't have the bill right in front of me, so what I assume you're referring to is the Commercial Grain and Feed Fund, and the way that revenue is derived for that fund, and that is referring to when feed is produced, there's a tax placed on it. The revenue then goes into this fund that we're talking about. It's not a new tax, it's pre-existing, and it's already being collected. So it wouldn't be a new tax.
Okay. Another question, and this one is on some water issues, and also joining us this evening, he's been quietly listening in, but it's Jay Rempe, and I think we'll give him this question, but there's been some rumors that Senator Lathrop has a water bill to try to get back at agriculture, and where is that at, and is it getting any traction? And Jay, can you hear me, and are you on? Not hearing you, Jay.
If Jay's not able to get signed on, I'm happy to take a weak stab at that one.
Okay. Well, I do have, he texted in his question, so I don't know if something is wrong with his microphone or that, but I'll kind of start it and then you can fill it in from here, Anthony. But,
Sure.
You know, what he's referring to is LB 1074, Senator Lathrop has introduced, and Farm Bureau opposes that, and simply because it would upset the current integrated water management plan. We're working very hard with the NRDs and others to try to make that legislation better, and then you can take it from there on what specifically we're doing if you know or have anything else to add.
Well, what I'll add is that, you know, Jay has been very deeply involved in the discussions around trying to modify that bill to make it something that would be palatable from our policy perspective. And so in regards to the specifics, I would recommend actually calling up Jay directly on that aspect, but I'll also add that in regards to traction, the bill does have traction. Senator Lathrop is a fairly effective senator, and given all of the sort of needs around water funding this year, it's basically functioning as a very kind of dangerous bargaining piece on his behalf, and so the bill has some traction, which is why we're working so hard to make sure that if it would move forward, it's in a form that would be acceptable from our policy perspective.
Okay, are there any other questions? Or Jay, I see your mic is unmuted. Are we hearing you at all now? We're still not hearing you, so something's not working. It worked last time we tried it, coming from Jay on his iPad, but any other questions from anyone else at this point for either for Anthony? We did have a question for Jordan earlier. And so, Jordan, are you back on?
Yeah, Jay, I wanted to. I am. I wanted to address that real quick. The question came from Tom, and I wanted to, basically was focused on precision ag data, and Tom's question was really focused in on value. You know, I talked about how some companies have an interest in precision ag data, specifically companies that maybe play the board a little bit. And, you know, say, you know, I use them as an example in name only, but say a Monsanto has all of this data on farmers, and they have access to not only data, but also real-time data. So your yield monitors that folks have, they are, say they're also connected online. They have the ability to transmit that signal to computers and so Goldman Sachs can see what Jeff Metz is what his harvest yields are in real time. Now, it wouldn't have Jeff's name on it. It would be really just a total number that is kind of punched through, but it has just a general real-time number as to what corn yields are in the state of Nebraska. And so they there is a value to that, as you can definitely imagine. And so the question that Tom asked is, can farmers receive some of that value? And I will tell you that, unfortunately, the possibility of farmers, quote-unquote, receiving a check is highly unlikely. What I would say is that producers have the ability to, again, going back to that Gmail example, the possibility is there for them to be able to possibly utilize these services for free, but that doesn't get the monetary value. But I will say that we continue to work on this issue because it is a large question, and it is I think it's a very valid question. That if you have data that maybe is, say, worth $1 billion to Goldman Sachs, well, why couldn't I get some return from that? And I think that question is still being answered. So I don't think the possibility of a check is there, but maybe there are some other options that we can do to try to see what other value we could get from that.
Okay, we have another question for you, Jordan, while you're on. It's, will landlords be able to sign up for data on their own farms that they might rent out? Or is this just for the actual producer?
You know, normally it goes with the producer that purchases the seed, the producer that owns the equipment. Obviously, if you have maybe a different renting, if you're not cash renting, if you're doing a shared renting, you know, that is a possibility. But I will say that it's mainly focused in on the producer because they're the ones that have that. Now, one of the tenets that we've passed in our policy that made it through to the FBF process and that made it into our policy was the fact that we want any data that's generated by a farm a farmer should be able to do with that data what he'd like. So what do you think the value of, say you have a piece of land, say you own it, you're not a tenant, but you actually own it. If you have the ability to provide yield history for 10 years on that, highly specific yield history on that piece of property, you should be able to sell that. And you should be able to receive a significant premium because most likely you would. And so that's another important tenet of that. Now, you know, going back to that question, again, it really focuses in on that producer side. And if you'd like, you know, I think that as we move forward here, this is probably going to be something that's going to have to come into rental contracts because it also makes your land a lot more valuable to rent if you have data that's generated and you can point to the data that's specific within your farm. But as of right now, I would say that data would belong more so to the producer than it would to the landlord. But that's a fair question. To be quite honest, I don't think we've gone that far yet. I don't think companies have gotten that far yet. That's the one thing I will say, and I don't mean to keep going, but this topic I love to talk about. A lot of these questions that you folks are raising are questions that the companies have maybe thought about, but not thought about in detail. And we are still at the precipice of this. We are still at the beginning of this topic. And the power of what this is, I think, is still being understood. And so I would say keep that in mind, and I would say that also lends credence to the possibility of your organization, of Farm Bureau, to be able to make an impact on this. The fact that we jumped on this early, the fact that we were the ones that really talked about to all these companies early on, and really raise some red flags, not to stop them, but to just make sure they're answering these questions. This landowner question, I will guarantee you that when we have this meeting, we're going to do another meeting in April with some of these companies. That's a question I'm going to raise because I think it's a fair question.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Also, you may have noticed, but I put your email address up on the screen for everybody to see, Jordan, because we did have a question of someone wanted to know what your email address was so they can ask for that data that you had shared in your presentation that you said you would email them. So if anyone else is interested in that, you can see Jordan's email address on the screen now.
Yeah, please shoot me an email and let me know. And I will also say that if you have Farm Bill questions, one thing of the website I did not pull up, but folks that are members, that are online members that can log into the website, you have the ability to ask Farm Bill questions, and I will try my best to answer those as well. As you're going through our information, you can type in a question. It'll be posted, and I'll do my best to answer those. So you can always call me, you can always email me, but that's another avenue to try to reach me is through the website.
Okay, any other questions? I guess I do have one more. This one is for Anthony, if you're back on.
Yep.
And this goes back into property taxes, and you know, with all the talk of property tax relief. And it's been going on for a number of years. This isn't anything new, but recently there was a lot of work last fall with the Tax Modernization Committee, and they heard so many people from all across the state really about how property taxes are affecting everyone. Isn't it almost an insult that the legislature is just simply dragging their feet and not really coming up with any concrete answers how to address that problem?
Yes, I mean, the bottom line is that yes, it is, and I'll try to answer that in three ways. One of the, I'll say biggest dynamics going on here is that, you know, a lot of this tax reform effort was driven by the governor, and there's members of the legislature that really dislike the governor. There's members of the revenue committee that feel like the governor may have sort of taken a step over the line and sort of getting in on their sort of issue area, and so we're kind of working within that dynamic. However, in regards to the specific policy proposals that have been put on the table, that being agricultural land valuation reduction and additional money for the property tax credit program, some of the things that we have been hearing have went almost directly against some of the substantive, quantitative, empirical data that we've tried to provide for revenue committee members in regards to how these policies would affect the bigger picture. And so on the Agleam valuation reduction side of things, we've tried our hardest to basically combat the notion that reducing the valuation ratio will severely impact the ability of schools, counties, community colleges, cities to collect revenues. In fact, we feel that given the steep increases in valuation ratio year over year, that such a reduction of the Agleam valuation would not necessarily affect their ability to increase revenues. It would simply restrict their ability to increase revenues as quickly as they have been able to do over the last 6 or 7 years. So, but at the end of the day, when you have school districts and counties, both of which coalesced and lobbied hard against the Agleam valuation reduction measure, you know, reaching out and touching individual senators, it really puts them in a tight spot when it comes time to voting for a measure like this. And on the property tax credit side, such an increase in funding requires either money from the cash reserve or general fund, and sort of like I laid out, there are so many competing issues on the table that are vying for additional funding. It's just difficult to get any significant dollars in such a competitive environment when you have prison overcrowding, when you have you know, job training, when you have school funding, all seeing the diversion of funds to one place as essentially a removal of their funding options. That too makes a very difficult environment to get anything done. And so while I agree that the legislature needs to do something more than what they're currently contemplating in regards to property tax relief, that's sort of the environment that we're trying to operate in right now.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any at this point, and we are up against our hour. Actually, just have gone a little past it by a little bit, but we certainly, once again, do want to thank everybody for joining us on the webinar this evening. We hope you found it informative, and at any time, if you have any questions, we are here at Farm Bureau to answer those questions on what's going on in the legislature or in Washington, D.C. I know sometimes we even scratch our heads at times wondering what's going on, or at least I do. But feel free to get a hold of us through email, give us a call. Also, I'd like to let everybody know our next webinar, we are scheduled to have that scheduled for Wednesday, March 26th, and we're going to try to do that over the noon hour for Central Time, folks. That'll be 11 o'clock Mountain Time, but 12 o'clock noon Central Time. And again, that is March 26th. So write that down. Write that down on your calendar. You will be seeing emails. Check Newswire, which comes out every Friday. It will be starting this coming this Friday. It will be in there. Also, starting in Policy Watch, we will put some advertisements, and then I will also send out a personal email just inviting you to join the webinar. Let us know what your thoughts are on these webinar series we're doing, because again, this is a service we're providing to Farm Bureau members, so we can keep you informed of what we're working on, because we are working on your behalf and for you in the capitals. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this evening, and we will see you next time. Thanks everybody so much, and good night.